Thank you for the warm welcome and introduction. I am very happy to be a part of this conference, and I'm hoping that the 3 days that you're able to be in Cebu at the Raja Park Hotel will be very beneficial to you. I know that some of you have presentations to make, and I wish that I could see them face to face, but unfortunately because of my schedule, I'm not able to actually be there. I was there in May and June of this year, and we'll be back again in April for another series of conferences. I believe that getting together as professors is very, very important, not only to share our research, but to learn from each other. And I hope that in the time that I have allotted to me, that you will learn something about scholarship. I'm not talking just about research, and I'm not going to teach you the ins and outs of research. You know that as professors. Even if you're new to the profession, you already have had some background in conducting research and probably had some success in publishing as well. What I want to talk with you about is the researcher's heart, the scholar's heart. Now, you notice I could have entitled this The Scholar's Head, but the focus of my presentation is on the motivation, the passion that we have as scholars, or that we ought to have as scholars. And I want to look at this passion from the standpoint of teaching, researching, and publishing. The diligence that we need to bring to each of those three areas. Because I realize that our work is broader than just teaching. We are not just teachers. We are researchers and we are publishers of these ideas, which means that what we do is bigger than that. That's why I really use the idea of the scholar, because that's what we're doing. We are studying something, we are investigating something, and then presenting what we have found to our classes as well as to our colleagues in the profession. So sit back, relax. I know this is unusual for many of you to have your keynote speaker kind of phone it in, but I think you'll enjoy what I have to say. Julie will make sure that you get a copy of this presentation if you would like it, so that you can listen to it again and again. And at the end, I'll come back with some concluding remarks. But in the meantime, just relax and enjoy the scholar's heart. Whether you are new to higher education or you've been a professor for 30 years, you've all felt the pressure to teach and then conduct research and to publish one's findings, all seem to pile on top of us like a heavy weight, a pile of rocks. Now, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. It's stating the obvious. But what I am telling you is, what do you do about it? How do you balance the job and what's required of you as a professor, the teaching, the committees that you are required to serve on, as well as preparing for tenure because you want to have a continuing contract, and then being promoted to a higher professorial rank. There's a lot weighing on us, and what we need to do is find a way to balance all of those very divergent, competing tasks with one another, so that we don't end up burning up as a result of just overwork and not getting anything done. So your task is to look at what you have to do that balancing. And for most of us, what it involves is getting organized. We're going to feel the pressure. The pressure is going to be there. But one of the ways to combat the pressure is to organize our work so that we're working on only what we need to work on and only thinking about what we need to be thinking about. Now, I have a wonderful calendar, and it's a week view calendar. I also have a monthly calendar too, but I concentrate mainly on the week. And on the left side of my calendar, I have a place where I can write all of the things that I need to do. And I try to only put the things that I am going to accomplish this week, not the things that I'm going to have to accomplish in 3 weeks or in 2 weeks. Only things I'm going to accomplish this week. Now, I may have some tasks that are rather big, and so I'm going to place them on several weeks because I'm going to work on it a little bit at a time. But I'm only going to put what I'm going to do this week on the calendar. And what that does for me is it frees my mind, first of all, from having to think about all the things that I have to do in the future. Those things are going to cover themselves, take care of themselves, because I'm going to address them when it's time to address them. But this week, I'm only going to focus on the things that I need to focus on. And it really targets me so that I can, amazingly enough, find time to teach, find time to conduct research as well as publish. Now, the other thing I do in this calendar is I always block in time for research. I always block in that time for research meetings with my colleagues and the collaborators that I work with, so that it's an obligation. It's not just, well, if I get to it, I get to it. No, this is something I'm going to do. And that seems to help me deal with the pressure, and it might help you. So get a very good calendar and mark that calendar out as to what you're going to do each week, and then only focus on that. And I think you're going to find that that's going to help you deal with the pressure. I would venture to say that most every professor in the United States has heard the phrase publish or perish. It may not be so common in the Philippines at this point, but it's going to get there as well. The term was first mentioned in a textbook in 1938. Logan Wilson was the author of the book, The Academic Man, A Study in the Sociology of a Profession. And he wrote about that in those days, right at the very beginning of World War II, that there was an increasing demand for professors to not only teach and work with students, but also to be conducting research on an active basis and publishing that research. Now, the question you might ask is, well, why is that a reality in higher education? Well, first of all, now think about how we evaluate teachers. And how do we evaluate professors? Well, professors and teachers are very similar, but they're also very different in what they do and how they interact with students. So it was a real puzzle for higher education in those days to find a way to evaluate professors that they wanted to keep and offer a tenured contract, and those that they wanted to promote, versus those that just weren't really right what they wanted, so they wanted to get rid of them. So they looked at the productivity of the professor, the publishing aspect of the professor, and used it as a rating for their effectiveness. So, well, what is it about the publication that's so special? Well, first of all, it's getting their ideas in print, the ideas of the professor, the scholar, in print, which gives it some permanency, versus a lecture that a student will hear, but beyond that, no one else will hear it. Also, it brings recognition to that scholar and their institution, because it'll say Dr. Rodney Davis, Associate Professor at Troy University. So their name gets in print, and that boosts the reputation of the institution. Yes, it can also bring funding to the university through endowments and grants. And so that certainly is a big motivator for universities to get their faculty busy publishing. Also, universities use it for a measure of the effectiveness of that professor, the competency of the professor. How much are they publishing? And it's one of those objective measures, because they can count. Oh, you've got 3 publications this year. Okay, that's great. Well, last year you had 2, so you've improved. Not necessarily an accurate measure of how effective they are, but it is a measure of their skill. And let's face it, the other reason that publishing is so critical nowadays is that if you're going to continue in higher education, it's what's expected. I don't care if you teach at a teaching institution, as I do. The pressure is to publish. Maybe not so much as would be required at a research institution, but certainly at a teaching institution, this is going to be vital. So now you know that there's a pressure to publish on every higher ed faculty. Let's look at the question of, well, why do we allow ourselves to feel pressured? Not saying that we aren't pressured, but just saying that we have these feelings of pressure. So why do we allow it? Well, I think first of all, there is a tendency in professors to overcommit to things. We take on too many responsibilities. We don't say no enough, and that means that we get too much on our plate, too much in our calendar for us to do in 1 week or in 1 month, and so that burden of task that's sitting out there, things that we have to do, it weighs on our mind. We don't want to let anybody down. We've made these commitments. We want to keep our commitments. We want our word to mean something. And what ends up happening is that we stress ourselves out trying to get these things done that maybe we should have just said no to. There also may be some feelings of inadequacy. Where we're just not up for the task. We've accepted these responsibilities, but as we're getting into them, we're beginning to realize that, wow, maybe I've bitten off more than I can chew. In other words, I've taken on too much. A third aspect to this may be also that we're not focused. And so we're going in a lot of different directions, and that can waste time, for one, but that also can leave us exhausted by trying to keep up with so many different things that we really don't feel like we have time to do any one of them very, very well. So we've got to get a handle on our schedules and our commitments, and that's why I said that calendar is going to be so important to you. Is it's going to help you get a handle on your daily schedule. You might think at this point that the pressure I'm referring to is all in our minds. It's something that we've created, but that it's not real. I'm here to tell you that the pressure on faculty members is very real, and it is not made up. It's a real fact. Now, there are 3 basic responsibilities that professors have when it comes to the scholarly activities. So there's the teaching. Now, teaching isn't just walking into a classroom and just talking with students. It requires some preparation of what are you going to talk about this week, preparing any visual aids, and I hope you use them instead of just sitting there and lecturing for an hour and a half without any kind of visual display. But then it's also the hour and a half of delivering the content. It's not just preparing it, but then having to stand and deliver for that time and engage students. Highly, highly stressful to be performing in front of the students. And then lastly is, even though you assigned the paper or the assignment, you have to then grade it. And that can take a large chunk of your time in just grading. I mean, I have just 20 students in one class, and it takes a good hour and a half, depending on the assignment, to get through them. Now, I've done these assignments for several years, so I know what I'm looking for and what I need to see. But imagine if you have 40 or 50 in a class, or 100 in a class, how much time you would have to spend each week in grading. And that time spent teaching has to be subtracted from the time that you have available for researching and then writing up your findings. Second area that takes a large part of our time is the researching. Now, many people have written about, well, how much time do you need to spend on researching each day to be productive? And some of the research that I had looked at showed that most professors need to spend between 2 and 3 hours a day conducting their research or working on their research to have 1 to 2 publications a year. That may be an oversimplification of it, and it may not be realistic, but I've seen, of course, professors do way more than just 2 in a year. But let's say that study is accurate. Well, then that's a lot of time in your day. Just think about your day right now. Can you carve out 2 to 3 hours and do nothing but research? And how would that impact all the other activities you do? Now, the challenge with conducting research also is that many professors, while they have a doctoral degree and they've taken classes in research, lack a lot of the technical skills required in conducting research. They don't know how to write technically. They don't know how to organize their research study so that they're able to efficiently go and conduct it. So there's a lot of challenge in conducting research because of the fact that a lot of professors don't have the skill. And I failed to mention that when it comes to teaching, have you ever noticed that most professors outside of the College of Education have never had a class in how to teach? Now, in the College of Education, most of those people are former teachers at the K-12 level, so they have some experience in teaching. But think about the people in the College of Business or the College of Arts and Sciences. Those people came from professions, came from other disciplines where they weren't teaching, which means they've not had the benefit of how do you prepare a lesson, how do you prepare a lecture, how do you prepare activities for the students to engage in during that class period. Finally, it comes down to the publishing, and this is one of the challenges that adds some pressure to what we're experiencing, is the fact that most journals that are considered Tier 1 journals, these are, and you'll hear about this later, that are research type journals, are going to have an acceptance rate of under 10%. So they're only going to take 10% at most of the articles that are submitted in a given month or in a given quarter. So that means that publishing is very competitive. Even if you do get your research finished on time, it may take you months to find a journal that will publish your findings. And even once they accept it, there may be some revisions that you're required to do. So it can take as much as a year to 18 months to get that publication in print somewhere. So this adds pressure for the person who is progressing towards tenure as a part of their academic life. And so it certainly means that the pressure that we're experiencing is not just all in our minds, it's real. Is there anything that can be done about the pressure? Well, certainly that's the $64,000 question. I think one of the things that we need to do is what I stated at the beginning, which is just get organized. Organize our life. That's our personal life as well as our professional life. There are a lot of things that will distract us in life, not only on the job, but also at home. And so if you're going to reduce the pressure that you're feeling to research and to publish your findings, then you're going to have to get not only your professional life in order, and I've told you about the calendar, but you're also going to have to get your private life in order as well. That means that you're not going to be watching TV a lot. That means that you're not going to be going out with friends that much. You're going to spend a lot more of your free time at your computer working on your research, interviewing or sending out surveys or whatever your research study may involve. So definitely getting organized and getting the balance to your life right is a first step. But then also there's some things that you can do to reduce the pressure, is to improve your effectiveness in the classroom, your teaching. And that often means learning some techniques that you can use to reduce the workload that you experience in preparing lectures and preparing activities. Preparing great PowerPoint presentations and doing it that way so that each semester you teach the course, you've already got the presentation part done. All you have to think about is what you're going to say. be more effective in the classroom by, again, bringing some organization. Also, eliminate the busy work, the things that just distract you from the things that you would normally do. A great distraction that we have that's probably personal more than it is professional, but it is our cell phones. They will distract you if you allow them to, and that's going to be a big piece of this pressure. Yeah, you're going to probably not be on social media as much, and you're not going to be texting your friends as much. Because you're going to use that time to focus on teaching and researching. Next, improve your ability to conduct research. That means you need to study about how to do qualitative or quantitative research. And as you increase your skills there, you will also become better at researching, which means that you'll be more efficient. And then lastly is look for different journals to publish in. There are a lot of Tier 2 journals out there, and these are not the heavily research-based journals. These would be a second level. These would probably be journals where more younger professors or new to the profession would publish their work, and look for those. I got most of my first publications in a series of journals that were produced by an organization called Intellect Based. Now, they would tell you very quickly that they're not a Tier 1 journal, that their acceptance rate is much higher. But one of the reasons that their acceptance rate is so high is they have a wide number of journals. I think it's about 13 or 14 journals. But in addition to that is that they are really catering to that novice professor who needs some publication experience. And these journals allow them to publish some of their early research. It's not as rigorous to get in. They're reviewed, but the review process is much quicker, and they're a little bit they're willing to take newer types of research and from younger professors. So using those kinds of journals, and there are plenty of them out there that you can find, would help you to get some publication experience as well as kind of get some things going so that as you progress in your career, you can then choose better journals, Tier 1 type journals. And I think the combination of these three things, your teaching, researching, and publishing, will help you to alleviate some of the pressure that's on you. The heart of scholarship is diligence. And I've divided this into three areas that if we really want to understand the heart of the scholar, we have to look at what scholarship involves. And yes, that does involve publishing, for one, but more than that, it involves diligent teaching and diligent research. And to be diligent is someone who is a hard worker as well as careful and thorough in their work. They are efficient, yes. They are also very careful. They're cautious to make sure that they're doing it the right way. And they're thorough in what they do. They're brief, but what they produce is thorough. It's a deep study. And then more often than that, it is that they are just very hard workers. And I know that we all have things that are pulling at us to occupy our time, occupy our attention. But the diligent scholar is the one who says, okay, I've got these distractions, but I'm going to ignore these distractions and focus on what I need to focus on right now. And I think that is really is what is at the heart of this entire endeavor of scholarship, is being diligent to get the work done, and to get it done so that it's of high quality as well. That's really what we're seeking here when we're thinking about the heart of the scholar. Now, we know that higher ed involves research, but the biggest piece of what we do is the teaching. because if we have no students taking our classes, we have no university to pay our salaries to conduct research. We would have to support ourselves through grants and funding outside the university. So when we look at diligent teaching, there are what I think 6 areas that really describe what that looks like. And so let me just review those briefly with you. It's student focused, it's content driven, it's engaging, it's participatory, diligent teaching is reflective, and it's challenging. And those are the 6 areas we're going to look at here in the next few slides. But before we get to those, there are several books that you need to buy. And you can get them from your local national bookstore. So they can be ordered through the bookstore if the bookstore doesn't have them. But these are books that you need to add to your list of things to read. These will be books that will help you in your teaching in higher ed. The first one is called Teacher Man by Frank McCourt, and it's an awesome book. So that's one. Then Teach Like a Pirate, kind of unusual title, caught my attention, by Dave Burgess, and that's going to give you some insight into what it means to be a teacher and how to teach. Another of my favorite books is by Parker Palmer, and this is The Courage to Teach. And he really does address higher education, where Burgess isn't really talking about higher ed per se, but and neither is Frank McCourt. But Parker Palmer's book, The Courage to Teach, does really think about the life of that professor and what it means. It's a book that you're going to use to reflect on your own practice. Then the book by Ray Esquith is Teach Like Your Hair's on Fire. I said Ray, I meant Dave. Dave Esquith. Teach Like Your Hair's on Fire. Awesome. This is mainly for K-12 teachers, but I think there's some things that we can bring out for us in higher ed as well. Again, just a really inspiring book. Then there's How Learning Works, 7 research-based strategies for effective teaching. Again, is by Ambrose is a good book to just understand how learning takes place in the classroom. Lastly, Powerful Techniques in Teaching Adults by Stephen Brookfield. Remember that there is a difference in pedagogy, which talks about the teaching strategies for children, and andragogy, the teaching strategies for adults. So again, these 6 books would be very useful to you to read. I think they would be something that you would do during your Christmas break, or during a spring break of some kind, or summer break, just to refresh yourself as you are working diligently in teaching. So let's go on and look at these aspects of diligent teaching. First, diligent teaching focuses on the student, as I've said. What will the students see and hear and do in your class? That's a question, 3-part question, that you have to ask every time you stand before your students. And if all you do is lecture to them for an hour and a half or 3 hours or however long your lecture is, and all they see is you standing behind a podium or at a desk, or all they hear is your voice, and all they do is take notes, then the question is, how are you focusing on that student? How are you providing activities to stimulate all of their senses? Now, what we know about brain science tells us that the brain is immensely curious and wants to know what's going on. So, the ears and the eyes and the hands are the gateway to the brain. So we need to engage students both visually, auditorily, and then kinesthetically. That's the doing part, moving our hands, moving our bodies. And you need to think about, how do your lectures reach each of those three areas. And just having them take notes does not mean you have engaged their mind. Just by the fact that they can see you, or just because they can see your PowerPoint presentation, does not mean you've engaged their mind. And so diligent teaching looks for ways to connect to that student and to connect to that student's mind through things that they see, things that they hear, and things that they do. This classroom may not look like the classroom you teach in, and it certainly has not reflected a lot of the classrooms that I've taught in the Philippines. But it is an example of a learning environment. And if you're going to be a diligent teacher, you need to think about the environment in which you're teaching. And we already talked about what you have to do when it comes to focusing on the student. Now you have to think about or focus on the environment. And your environment needs to be organized. Chairs in a certain way, tables in a certain way, a certain organization. It needs to be functional. It needs to have all of the things in it that you need in order to present that information. So a whiteboard or a chalkboard or a screen so that you can show your presentation, as well as an LCD projector. It needs to have the extension cords or the outlets, electrical outlets for you to use. It also has to be purposeful. Everything that's in it needs to have a purpose. And if it doesn't have a purpose in the classroom, then get rid of it. It's just taking up space. The learning environment needs to be planned. So what are you going to do in this environment? How are you going to use the environment so that you can teach it? Are you going to break them into small groups so that they can talk about what you're lecturing about? Or are you going to break them into small groups and have them do something, an activity that's related to what you're talking about? The room needs to be planned. How am I going to do this activity in this room with the furniture that I have? The learning environment needs to be engaging. And that may mean things that you have put on the chalkboard or on the whiteboard, or posters that you have put to the wall, or artifacts, models, or diagrams that you have placed around the room. All of those things need to be thought about, and that are engaging students in the learning process from the beginning, from their first moment in the classroom. Yes, your environment needs to be free of distractions so that people aren't looking in the window or the door is open and people are looking in, or you hear noise from the hallway out in front. They need to be conducive to learning. Now, this is one where there's a lot of things that make up a conducive learning environment. First of all, it's not too hot or too cold. Now, in the Philippines, you can get a lot of hot and sometimes too cold. I mean, you go to Baguio, you can get some cold weather up there. But when it's in the classroom, if students are too hot, they're not paying attention. They're going to get real drowsy and may even sleep on you. Also, the environment has to be conducive in learning in terms of inviting and welcoming. Is the professor displaying an attitude that says, hey, I am glad you're in this class, that you're an important part of what we're doing, and I couldn't do my part if you weren't here in this class? Are you making them feel welcome? Or are you making it like, I have to endure you being here? I really don't want you in my class, but I got to have you here, so I'll just tolerate you. Is it inviting or is it welcoming? The next one that deals with conducive learning environment, is it safe? I mean, are there things that could hurt people? Exposed electrical wires, are desks in such a way that a person could easily trip and fall and be hurt? Is it safe from outside forces, people who might want to do harm? That kind of thing. And then lastly, is it innovative? Is it taking things that we already know and using them in unique ways? You would have to evaluate that for yourself. But diligent teaching requires a very focused environment. When does diligent teaching occur? Well, I think it occurs when the professors are still learning themselves, that they don't know it all, and that all they're doing is just getting in there and telling students stuff that they know. I think professors who are still curious about their discipline and who are still learning new facts about it are definitely the ones who are more diligent in their craft, because they're looking for the new aspect of their discipline. But also professors who are passionate about what they're doing. They really like teaching. They really like learning. And so certainly that passion spills over onto the students, and they get excited about the topic that they're studying. I think diligent teaching happens when professors are approachable, that they don't see themselves as the sage on the stage, and are too good to talk to students. Go see my secretary, or go see my graduate assistant. I don't have time for you. No, I think professors who are approachable are ones who are very diligent at what they do, and actually are ones who the students want to associate with. And lastly, I think that diligent teaching takes place when professors are still curious about the world in general. They still want to know. I mean, that's why a lot of us went into higher ed, is because we wanted to know more about a particular topic and then share what we've learned with other people. If you're still not sure what diligent teaching is, let me sum it up in 3 ideas. Diligent teaching first is attentive. Attentive to the content, but mostly attentive to the student and the student's needs. And professors are the ones who need to be attentive to those aspects. Knowing your students, knowing what they need to have versus what they might like to have, and balancing between the very practical and the very ornamental. Secondly, I think diligent teaching is student-centered. It's based on the student. What do they need to get out of this course? Now, there's a lot of stuff that I could tell my students that would be nice to know, but not critical to know. And because the time is short with them, I only have 8 weeks, and then they're in another class, I have to choose the most important information to share with them to make them the kind of leader they need to be. Lastly, I think diligent teaching is purposeful, that there is a reason behind everything that we do, and not just because it's the way we've always done it, but that our teaching has to have a purpose, and we should be able to articulate, we should be able to tell people why we do what we do in the classroom, why we use this particular method, why are we covering this particular set of standards or ideas, and that will help us, I think, to be the diligent teachers we need to be. I don't remember where this quote comes from that I've paraphrased here, but I know it comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. I don't remember which particular publication of his it's found in, but I really like what it says. It says this: "It is the passion to know that drives the teacher from the classroom to conduct research, and the same passion that drives him back to the classroom to share what he has learned." And I think that's what happens in diligent teachers. They're still curious about the world, they're still curious about their discipline, and it is that curiosity, that desire to really know more and more, in my case about leadership, that drives me to conduct research on how people lead and what they do when they lead, so that when I have finished the research, I am driven back to the classroom in excitement to share what I have learned. And that seems to be a great way to sum up what it means to be a diligent teacher. A diligent teacher is passionate about being in the classroom, but they're also passionate about conducting research and learning more, so they have more to share with the students. Now let's turn our attention to diligent research, the second leg of a 3-legged stool. in higher education. And I'm not going to cover research in any depth. I did that in May of this year at a research conference in Baguio at the Crown Legacy Hotel. And I spent about 3 hours, I think, that day talking about scholarship, but especially focusing on what it means to be a researcher, because there were a lot of people in the audience that were new to conducting research. And I don't know about this audience. There may be a few of you out there that have little experience in conducting research. Well, unfortunately, I have to disappoint you. I don't have the time today to talk in depth about research, other than to kind of just superficially hit the high points for you, things that I really want you to think about. Diligent research involves qualitative or quantitative. Now, I'm of the philosophy that it needs to be one or the other. I know that many people who conduct research in the Philippines do these mixed studies where it's partly quantitative, partly qualitative. I don't do that, and that's only because I think that qualitative research helps us to understand phenomena. We need to understand what it is we're studying first before we try to go and do quantitative studies, which typically ask us to manipulate variables to watch the reaction. But if we don't understand the phenomena to begin with, we may not have a good enough understanding then to be manipulating the variables. So diligent research is research that is honest research, that has not been doctored, that is true, the findings are as they have been provided by the data, but that it focuses on one of these two research methodologies and doesn't try to do both of them. I think that diligent research is directed by either a hypothesis, if it's quantitative, or a very strongly worded research question that really is getting to the heart of what it is that you want to study. So being diligent in your research is going to have a great impact on your ability to publish. And like I said, you can see here the two major types of research, quantitative and qualitative, and then choosing one of those would be a best way to be diligent in your research, to help you be efficient, to choose just the one of them. So yeah, you've got to be a diligent researcher in order to be a real scholar. There was a time when there was a strong division between research institutions and teaching institutions. And as you know, a research institution predominantly is focused on the activity of conducting research. That's what the professors do. Oh, they teach, but many of them have, if not all of them, have graduate assistants that actually conduct the class. And the professor may come in and give a few special lectures, but for the most part the class is handled by a graduate or teaching assistant. Teaching institutions, on the other hand, were not primarily conducting research, but that the faculty were predominantly just teaching. And they were preparing students to be educators. That's what a lot of teaching institutions started out as here in the United States. They were called normal schools, which is where people learned how to teach K-12 education. But as other disciplines were added, the arts and the sciences were added to that, that focus kind of got generalized to a certain degree. And now teaching institutions do have some more research focuses to them. So in the past, it was at research institutions, it was considered a requirement that you produce 2 publications a year. You had to have 2 publications in a given year. And at the teaching institution, there was no requirement for research. But I would say in the last 15 to 20 years, maybe even 25 years, the teaching institutions have become more like the research institution, and that publication is now considered an expectation on the part of tenure and promotion. If you don't have publications, you're not going to get promoted, or you're most likely not going to get tenure. I know of a situation where a professor that at the 3-year review did not have enough publications and was terminated right then and there. They just told the professor that there's no sense in you even submitting a tenure and promotion packet because you will not get approved. You just don't have the track record to show. And what they meant by that is that the requirement now is on consistent scholarship. Not that you just have 2 publications in a year or 3 publications in 5 years or whatever the case may be. Now it is that you are consistently publishing. Every year you're putting out something, you're producing something, showing that you are of value to the university. And they're going to expect you to develop a very active research agenda. And it's true here at the teaching institution where I work. We submit a research agenda as well as it is at research institutions. So the lay of the land has changed a bit in higher ed in the United States. And I think it is going to find its way to the Philippines. I know that it's already found its way to the research institutions in the Philippines. But I know that some of the teaching institutions, there's a lot more flexibility in the system. But I think that flexibility is going to be concretized, made hard, that there is going to be the requirement that you have a certain number of publications in a year. So the way higher ed has changed. And that's an important note to begin with on diligent publishing. Well, with all this publishing, how would you rate the quality of the research, Dr. Davis? Well, I would have to tell you that of the research I have seen at conferences that I've attended and things that I've seen in the journals that I serve as an editor or serve on the editorial board of, I would say the most of the research that is produced in a year is all for the sake of tenure and promotion. It's published just to have a publication. And when you look at the research and what it means to the discipline, here's what I found. Only about 45% of the articles that are in the Tier 1 journals of the top 4,500 scientific journals are cited within 5 years of publication. Someone else referenced that article in a publication that they've done. Less than half in that first 5 years. Now, of that 45%, only 42, about half again, receive 1 or more citations, and most often these citations are by the author himself or herself. In other words, they're writing a new publication and they cite a previous publication. It's not an outsider doing it. Basically, the majority of the research out there is uncited. In other words, and so we say, well, what is it? Who cares if it's cited? What that says is that somebody else looked at your article and said, wow, this is worthy of reminding people of, and I'm going to cite this. So what does that tell us? It tells us very simply that most of the research is not significant or it's inconclusive and therefore not usable. Now that puts a kind of damper on what we're doing here when we're talking about scholarship, but it's a reality. A lot of the research out there is poorly done and it's poorly reported to a journal and therefore really doesn't add a great deal to the knowledge base that we have in each discipline. We live in an exciting time when it comes to publishing because there are so many journals out there in which we could publish our research. In just the sciences alone, there's between 25,000 and 40,000 scientific journals. That's just one area. Probably if you were to add up all the journals that are out there, and I'm thinking of peer-reviewed journals, there would probably be 100,000 journals that are published in annual formats or semi-annual or quarterly. There's a lot of journals, which means that's great for the professor. It also means that you have to be careful and do a little legwork in looking around to see what journals are the most appropriate venues for you to publish your work in. Now, journals are ranked by their impact factor. And they're ranked either Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. And you can see the impact factor to the right. A Tier 1 journal has an impact factor of 3 to 4. A Tier 2 has an impact factor of 2 to 3. And a Tier 3 has an impact factor of 1 to 2. Now, what does the impact factor mean? Well, it's a measure that's calculated by dividing the number of citations for that particular article, and you can find those number of citations in the Journal Citation Index, and that calculation is divided by the number of citations by the number of articles published in the previous 2 years. So you look at however many citations you got for your article by the number of articles published in the previous 2 years. So an impact factor of 1 means that on average an article published in the last 2 years would have been cited 1 time, which means that it would be a Tier 3 type journal or article. But if it had been cited 3 to 4 times, then it's most likely a Tier 1 journal. And what this all boils down to is simply you want to be publishing in better journals where there is a higher impact factor. Well, then you're going to want to publish in Tier 1 journals. The problem with that is it's very hard to get published in a Tier 1 journal because they can be so selective. And truth be told, for the most of us, a Tier 2 journal would be just as fine because we're not teaching at highly competitive Ivy League schools. We're not teaching maybe at the University of the Philippines or at Ateneo or De La Salle Dasmariñas. We're probably we're working at a state university. Great universities, regionally great universities. And I work with one that I still think is one of the best universities in the Philippines, and that's Tarlac State University. It's a region, I think 1, or maybe it's a region 3, but university, but it is an excellent university. And so, yeah, if you're teaching at a university of that caliber, then probably Tier 2 is acceptable with a 2 to 3 impact factor. But just remember that there are plenty of journals out there where you can publish your work, and don't be pressured into just trying to only get into Tier 1 journals. There are many fine Tier 2 and Tier 3 journals. I said earlier that some of the journals have a less than 10% acceptance rate. Does that mean that that's a particularly good journal? Not necessarily. It just means that they have plenty of articles coming in on a regular basis so that they don't need to take as many articles as maybe another journal that does. Maybe they only have 4 publications a year and they can only have 40 publications because they're publishing 10 papers in each journal. Well, that means that they have to be highly selective of the articles so that they get the 40 best papers in their journal. But journals that publish more often need more publications, more submissions. Journals that maybe have a higher standing, in other words, they're a Tier 1 journal, they have to review more articles to find the 50 or 60 that they're going to publish in a given year. So there's a lot of things that affect acceptance rates. And the assumption is false to assume that the higher the rejection rate or the lower the acceptance rate indicates that it's a high-quality journal. So here are some factors that do affect whether your publication is going to be accepted. Number one, how many manuscripts versus the number of manuscripts needed does the journal have each month? How many submissions do they have to have? What quality do the manuscripts have to be in? Some journals are more selective. They want a higher quality. They want more senior faculty producing the work, and junior faculty aren't accepted as often. So that's an issue. The final issue is the prestige or reputation of the journal. If it's a highly, highly respected journal, then they might be able to accept less and less publications than somebody else. So it depends on those factors alone as to whether you're going to get accepted. But here's again, just reminding you of the good news, which is that there are plenty of journals out there that would be very happy to have your paper. And I think as far as most universities go, they don't care that much about where you're publishing as much as they care about if you're publishing. I somewhat hesitate to talk about research fraud because part of me has a Pollyanna view of the world. I see the world through rose-colored glasses, and I don't want to think that there are people who are consciously looking for ways to manufacture or falsify their data to get their publication out there or to get some notoriety. I just want to think that people are doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. But I'm not so much of a Pollyanna to realize or believe that it doesn't happen. I think we can just look in the newspaper and see plenty of examples of people who are producing findings that are not accurate. So what is research fraud? And how is it impacting our publishing? Well, some of the fraud deals with reproducing data in whole or in part in multiple journals as if it's a new study. I have seen colleagues who took dissertation research, and they were able to get 3 or 4 journal articles out of their dissertation by focusing on different aspects of the data. And instead, it was all one study. But what they do is they focus on one narrow aspect of the data as if they have reconducted the study with a different sample, a different population, and they got these new findings. We call that salami slicing. It's taking meat and slicing it very, very thinly so that you can spread it out over a lot of different places. And that's what they call it in publishing, salami slicing, where you're using the same research data in whole or in multiple parts, but you're putting it in different journals and giving the title of the research a different title as if it's a new research, when in fact it's the same old research that you've done before, but that you have just reported a different aspect of it. Of course, there's duplicate publications. I was surprised at this when I was doing some editing work a few years ago, where publications had been submitted to multiple journals, and it was the same journal article, or what they had done is they changed the title of the article, but the actual body of the article was the same word for word, and they call that duplicate publication. That's actual fraud, where they're just giving it a new title as if to get a different publication out of it. The second type of research fraud involves ghost authors. And you will see this when you see publications that have, say 5 or 6 co-authors on there. And as you investigate, you find that some of these people have had no impact on the research at all. They were not involved in any way. And oftentimes this is done for department chairs and deans, so that they can get some publishing credit from it, and the authors who actually did the work maybe they're very sincere in what they're doing, but it's wrong. If you didn't write it, you didn't help conduct the research, your name doesn't need to go on it. Now, I don't have that problem because I typically publish alone, or I only publish with one other person, so the work is between the two of us or myself. But when you start to see multiple authors, you might start wondering, well, what did the author 3 do versus author 4? Or what did author 1 do versus author 7? So these are some things that are going on in research. It's not new. I mean, if you look at the Piltdown Man controversy, in 1912, there was research fraud. It was conducted by Charles Dawson, and what he had done is he had claimed to find that missing link between apes and mankind that evolutionists have been seeking for hundreds of years. In 1953, though, it was exposed as a fraud. The skull that he found, that he named Piltdown Man. Basically, it was the skull of a human and the lower jaw of an orangutan. The fraud was masterminded not by Dawson himself. He was an unknowing party to the fraud. Martin Hinton was the zoology curator at the National History Museum in London at the time. And Charles Dawson was the curator of paleontology. And there was a rivalry between these two departments at the museum. And Hinton had a vendetta against Dawson. And what he did is he went and took this jawbone of an orangutan and matched it up with a human skull. And he placed it where he knew Dawson would find it. And when it was given to Dawson, Dawson proclaimed that it was a missing link. That Dawson didn't recognize it as a fraud. He didn't recognize the lower jawbone of the orangutan and the upper part was a human skull. Of course, he was doing it, Hinton was doing it to embarrass Dawson. Because, I mean, if Dawson was such a great paleontologist, he should have been able to look at the bones and tell that they didn't go together. So he did it for a motivation of making Dawson look foolish. But it's a good example of research fraud that's out there even today. Now, with the number of journals out there that there are, a question came to me one time about, should I publish in electronic journals or should I publish in print? Basically, the person was asking me, is one better than the other? Well, these are some things that I think you need to consider before you submit an article for publication. First of all, you need to know, what is the quality of the journal? Is it a Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3? And all you have to do is look in the front cover of the journal. If it's a good journal, they're going to put their impact factor somewhere in that journal. And remember, if that impact factor is higher than 3, you know that it's a Tier 1. Also, look for journals that are indexed, which means they're reviewed by an outside organization. And that organization rates those journals on not only their ranking them, but rating them on their acceptance rates, as well as the rigor of the journal, how often it's published, do they have a peer review process, all of these things. So you want to find journals, whether they're print or electronic, that are high quality. Then look at how long has the journal been published. I mean, is it its first year of publication? I mean, that's not a bad thing necessarily, but are they going to be around for a while? Because you want to be publishing in journals that are going to be around for a number of years. One that you can find by looking at an index is how many people are in that journal's readership. I mean, if there are only 200 people across the country or around the world looking or having a subscription to this journal, then it's not going to have a great impact on a lot of people. How is the journal accepted by your discipline or your institution? Yeah, that just depends on whether they look at this journal and say, yeah, this is a great journal. It's representative of the discipline or the field of study. And like in my area, educational leadership is a premier journal for school leaders, and therefore it's one that would be a good journal to publish in. Number 5, you need to look to see if it's peer-reviewed or not. I mean, peer-reviewed is the very lowest level. If it's not peer-reviewed, I wouldn't waste my time publishing in it, because that means other people who are in my discipline, for example, in leadership, they know what good leadership articles look like, so that's who you want to rank them. So is it peer-reviewed? That's important. Now, why would you consider an online journal? Well, there are some reasons. Number 6 tells us that online journals have a faster publication time, and they have to. I mean, they're not having to print something and send it out to libraries or to individuals. They can post that journal online within just a matter of minutes. Another reason that online electronic journals are becoming very popular is that it's very easy to search them to find the articles you're looking for. There's not as many difficult distractions that would be in those. There's less clutter, in other words, in the journals. The electronic access allows us to search them and find things that we want to find. Now, another reason is the staying power. You know, like I said, a lecture is forgotten many times by the time the lecture is over. But articles published today will still be around 5 years from now, especially if that journal article here in the United States, if that journal is stored at the Library of Congress, which, for those of you not in the United States, you know that the United States Congress has a library. But it's not so much a lending library like your university library. It's a preservation library. Now, people go there and read, and congressmen go there to conduct research that they need to do, or their staff does it. But it's also a way to preserve important documents. And so there was an organization I worked with a few years ago that had all of their journal articles stored at the Library of Congress, which means that they're there forever. That library never gets rid of the journals that it's storing. So it definitely has some staying power. And those, of course, were searchable, just like other electronic journals. So, yeah, I don't think one is better than the other. I think now that most journals, even the Tier 1 journals, have not only a print version but have an electronic version, and it's just a sign of the times. We've got this media in the internet. We've got a way to get our message out through the journal, so why not take advantage of it? 20 years ago, there maybe were 100 journals that were online, and of those 100 journals, maybe 5 or 10 of them were strictly online, whereas the other 90 were print and online. Now you have journals that the majority of journals are just printed online. They're not even printed in paper anymore. And sent out to your library, which is great. That makes it a lot easier to access them. So I don't think that's as much of an issue anymore as it was a few years ago. should you strive to collaborate on research, be one of many co-authors, or be the sole author? I thought I would talk about that for a moment, just because it seems to me that, depending on your university, that there is a push to work with your colleagues to conduct research. Now, I am, for the most part, a sole author. And you can see the reasons why I like being a sole author. I just have a lot more control over the project. I can explore topics that maybe other people aren't interested in. I get the full credit, not shared with other people. There's a lot more flexibility. I can work on it when I want to work on it. I'm not working on somebody else's timeline. I tend to be the guy that kind of leans more towards sole author. But there are some things that can be good about co-authoring. It certainly can be easier to conduct your research because you don't have the entire responsibility of the project. You may only have one part of the project, and other people have to do their part. But there's also the thought that when you are co-authoring, that you're a team player and you work well with others, and that seems to be important to a lot of universities. One downside that I see with co-authoring, it's not easy to divide the credit or workload. Someone always does more work than another. So this just is your personal preference. Should you be a co-author or should you be a sole author? That really is up to you. There are advantages to each option. A very important issue to many conducting research is how do they have the funding to conduct the research? Because unfortunately, universities do not have a large amount of funds for you to conduct your research or to present your research at conferences. In the Philippines, here are 3 examples of corporations, and very large corporations, that are funding research in particular areas. And you can go to their website. I don't know if these are still active websites. I think they are. But if you will go to these websites, you can see their foundations and what they support, and see if they would fund your research. In other words, give you a small grant for you to conduct your research. So you got PLDT and Petron and San Miguel. All of these companies have money that they give away to nonprofits to conduct research. So your university could get some money from them, which would allow you to attend conferences like the one that you're attending right now, or even go to other international conferences where you could present your findings at that research. Plus, the money can not only help you conduct the research, but to publish the research, to pay for the book to be published, to pay any of the reprint costs that you might have to pay to get copies of research. So when you're thinking about being a diligent publisher, you also have to think about how do you raise the money to pay for that research. And here's just an example, 3. And I know that there are plenty of other companies in the Philippines that you could approach. And some of them are international companies that have a Philippine branch to them that you could get, again, small amounts of money from to help you support your research. But when you're looking at financing your research, it does take some detective work. You need to do some investigating. And I would start with the internet. Go to those websites that I just gave you and look at what they fund. And if you have questions, email them. They have email contacts that you can contact the person who is responsible for giving out the money, and they can answer questions or tell you what forms you have to fill out. And if you can't email, certainly call them. But there is some detective work that you need to do at the very beginning, and that involves just going out and looking for places that might fund your research. So first step in this is investigate. Next step in financing your research, doing the detective work, is gathering the data. And that means going to those websites. So I'm not familiar anymore with what PLDT funds, but that would be something you'd want to find out. What kinds of projects do they fund? When do they give their money out? Is it given out once a year? Do you have a chance to get money multiple times in a year? Who do they fund? I mean, do they fund universities, or do you have to be an NGO, a non-government organization? So knowing who they fund will help you decide whether it's worth you submitting a proposal to get the funding. Lastly, how do they fund? And a lot of that involves, not only what you have to do to get the money. Do you submit a proposal? Do you submit a letter of inquiry? Is there just a form that you fill out? That really helps you determine how are they going to get the money to you. Does the money have to come to an organization, and then you draw money from that, like your university actually is the awardee? So those are questions you need to find the answer to as well. Third part of financing your research, which involves detective work, is writing the proposal. Most of these large companies, like PLDT, they're going to expect you to submit a multiple-page proposal, and they will tell you how many pages that it has to be. 5 pages or 20 pages. They're going to set a limit, and I'm telling you, first of all, you need to be aware of what those restrictions and requirements are. So, when you write your proposal, you need to, first of all, follow the directions that they provide. If they ask for 20 pages, don't give them 10, or don't give them 30. Give them the 20 pages they want. Fill up those pages. But when you fill up the pages, make sure that you are telling your story. See, nobody else will. They need to understand who you are, who your organization is, as well as how you're going to use the money. What will you do with this money? How is it going to benefit your research? And ultimately, how is your research going to benefit other people? Research for research's sake does not get funded. But research to help people, to help teachers to do a better job in instruction, or research that helps people understand a product and what product they prefer, that helps the company, well, that's something that these organizations are interested in. So tell your story, so that because people don't know about you, that you just don't leave any possibility for them to assume. Then thirdly, you need to meet the deadlines or be early. Early is good. Late is bad. You won't be considered. Remember that these organizations get hundreds of requests for money. And so many of them are looking for any excuse they can to discard your proposal. And if you're late, you're going to get rejected. They're not going to accept your proposal. They'll just automatically, if it came in a day late, they'll mark it late and send you the letter, sorry, we can't help you. So you meet the deadlines that they've established. Be early. Lastly, don't become discouraged just because your first try out you didn't get awarded money. I remember the first grant that I did got rejected, and the second one got rejected, but the third one got funded. And it was diligence on my part that kept me trying, looking for ways to improve my proposal so that it would eventually get published, accepted, and funded. So what I can tell you is just keep trying. And every day, make your proposal a little bit better and then submit it. You'll learn something from each attempt that you make. And that's the key. And if once you get funded, then you are able to conduct that research. It is so satisfying to be able to do that. And so here's just a way for you to get some necessary funds to conduct the research that you want to conduct. I know it seems hard to believe that an hour has slipped by on us already, but it has, and we're at the end of the presentation. Now, we've addressed the idea of scholarship in 3 dimensions in this presentation. We looked at what it meant to be a diligent teacher and how our focus has to be not only on the students, that kind of is a given. We also have to think about what it is we want them to see and hear and do in our classroom. So the content is certainly going to be important for us to look at. And then we need to consider the environment in which we're teaching and how is that helping us in our teaching and then also hindering us as well. And then from there we looked at research very, very briefly to deal with issues about what does diligent research look like and what methodologies are we going to use. And certainly more can be said about that, but let's let it suffice that you need to have some careful reflective time thinking about what kind of research you want to do and how is it adding to what we already know. And then lastly, we looked at this idea of publishing our findings and sharing what we've learned with other people. And that is through the publishing process. And I know that can be very daunting because of the access to journals. There aren't a lot of local journals in the Philippines, although that's growing. And the Global Research Association for Convergence and Excellence, they have a very good journal that I know that if you have submitted a paper for this conference will certainly be considered as a part of that journal. But there are other journals in the Philippines that you can access as well as certainly journals here in the United States. Lots of venues for you to publish your research. So don't let that stop you from getting your ideas out into the world for others to consider and benefit from what you've explored. Now, if you want to contact me, you certainly can do that. Here on this slide, you'll see how to reach me, and that's via email at davisr@troy.edu. That's my professional email address, davisr@troy.edu, or you can send it via U.S. mail, or in this case, Philippine mail through DHL. Send me a question if you've got one or a comment, anything that you'd like to follow up on. I'd love to talk with you. I'll certainly just pass on the word to Julie. She'll get that to me. And I look forward to seeing you at a future conference. Beginning in May of 2019, I'll be conducting conferences both in Baguio, Tarlac City, and then a few down in the Cebu area. So certainly be looking for those events on social media. You'll hear about them as well as through the GRACE organization. So look forward to being with you at another event like this, and I hope that you have a great rest of your conference. Take care now.